If we could, General, I wanted to touch on a couple of other topics. The Azerbaijan Airlines aircraft that went down. Have you heard anything further about the cause of that crash?
So, two or three things that I would want to address right up the top. First of all, what courage and skill of these pilots that managed to get that aircraft on the ground in Kazakhstan after it was hit, and after they were denied the ability to land somewhere on the western side of the Caspian. They then were diverted across the Caspian and crash landed in Kazakhstan. That's incredible. I mean, as I've listened to aviation experts talk about what loss of controllability, that the pilots could keep that thing even in the air to get to land, and apparently about a third to a half of the passengers survived that terrible crash. It was incredible, and I think that credit goes to those pilots. Secondly, why was the Grozny airport still open? I mean, there have been reports coming from the Russian side that there were Ukrainian drones all around Grozny airport. Part of this ongoing series of Ukrainian strikes deep into Russia. And so typically, I know I live near the airport here in Frankfurt. Anytime some knucklehead's out with his own personal drone, they shut down the whole airport. So why would the Grozny airport still be open so that this airliner from Azerbaijan would be trying to land there? It should have been diverted long before that. Finally, I think there's no doubt that this aircraft was hit by Russian air and missile defense. Of course, there'll be an investigation. Of course, they'll have to do it as they should. But just looking at the footage that you and everybody else has looked at, those are not bird strikes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I know the investigation is ongoing. It's tough, and the last thing we want to do is speculate. But I appreciate your insight and your update there. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and this is sort of outside the focus of our conversation. As you mentioned, you're based in Frankfurt. What's your perspective on this latest Christmas market attack that took place well outside of Berlin?
Yeah, in the city of Magdeburg. So, of course, it's terrible if you watch the video of this car slamming into the crowd. And as most of your listeners know, in Germany, it's famous for its Christmas markets, and people are out there, and it's cold, and it's a nice. It's a classic Christmas sort of ambiance. But after the attack on the Berlin market, Christmas market, back about I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, they started putting up the stanchions or other sorts of balustrades, I think they're called, to prevent a vehicle from being able to drive into an open air place. Now, it looks to me in this case that they didn't have those in this particular market. I don't know that for a fact, but that's the kind of thing that the Minister of the Interior, the federal Ministry of Interior, and then at the state level Ministry of Interior would have been looking at. Why were they not better protected? Now, the initial response would have been, oh my gosh, there's an Arab or a Muslim that did this, and so the knee-jerk reaction was going to be AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, which is the right-wing political organization in Germany, was going to seize on this because there's a federal elections coming up in 23 February here in Germany. But it turns out, in a strange twist, the gentleman who was driving was a guy who's a legitimate migrant. He's a doctor, and he's been here for years, and he's pro AfD against illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
So I can't figure out. I mean, that's a hard one to piece together. But nonetheless, it still will be seized on by different groups. Why didn't the government do a better job of protecting people anyway? And that's one of the underlying themes of extremist organizations.
Yeah, I think it's a really key point that is so important. It's difficult for people to do, but anytime you have something like this, right, the tendency is to kind of jump to a conclusion, right? And nobody really has the patience or wants to have the patience to wait for an investigation to play out, right? To determine motivation, determine plans and intentions of whomever the perpetrator is, or and so it's difficult to do. But anytime there's an incident like this,
Mm.
typically my phone blows up, and I get calls from outlets saying, would you, do you want to come on and talk about this latest incident? And usually my reaction is not really, because the investigation's ongoing, and all we'd be doing is speculating about motivations of the perpetrators. So yeah, this one was extremely complex, incredibly sad as they always are, but very complex. Sir, if kind of to wrap up the conversation, to be mindful of your time as we make our way to the very end of this year, which seems to have blown by. Um, what's your sort of looking forward with the Ukraine conflict after all this time? And I don't want to put you in a tough position to say, okay, this is what the incoming administration in the U.S. is going to do, but what's your gut feeling? What's your perspective on this? Where do you think this is going? And I'm not going to hold you to it, although I hope you'll come back on in a month or two and we can talk about it more.
Well, I was encouraged by the selection of General Kellogg to be the envoy for the Trump administration to Ukraine, and to deal with the how do you bring this war to a conclusion? Because General Kellogg understands the strategic significance of this, and he also is very clear-eyed about Russia being somebody you can't trust, and that Ukraine's sovereignty is important. So that gave me some optimism, and also I think Mr. Waltz, the National Security Advisor, also is a realist about how who and what Russia is. I think that I'm also encouraged by the fact that most of the senior Republican leadership in the Congress, House and Senate, are pro NATO. They understand the significance of the transatlantic relationship for the United States, and why it's important that we help Ukraine. So I think the administration will seek to do what they can to, as the president elected talked about, but the reality is, just getting an agreement is not going to do anything to help make America safer or help our allies. And so I think as the reality of that sets in, and especially since most of the administration is so focused on China, what better way to tell the Chinese that we're not goofing around than to demonstrate that we have the political will and the capability to help Ukraine defeat Russia, to shut down Iran, to shut down North Korea, and then the Chinese would have to take note of that.
Yeah, that's a terrific point to raise. They have obviously been watching the U.S. and our allies' response to the Ukraine conflict, um, being mindful of their interests in Taiwan. So I think you're absolutely right. This is everything's connected, right? The world is shrinking still, and nothing happens in a bubble. So I appreciate that point.